1 year ago this week, we received the Senate report on Bush-era torture of CIA detainees. And for my first time, Lewis, I heard the term rectal feeding for the first time. We've talked about rectal feeding since then. That still, to me, is one of the most vile images. And what we found out in the torture report was truly stunning. But discussions of the torture report have sort of waned in the last year because we've talked about ISIS and we've talked about so many other things. That craziness, including rectal feeding that we learned about a year ago, is, for many people, pretty far from the top of their minds.
Yeah, I mean, that was the big revelation
Yeah.
in that report. But still, for 10 years before that, torture was still a hot topic.
Yeah.
And so we pretty much learned everything there was to learn, and we were desensitized. And the rectal feeding thing was kind of like the cherry on top.
For me, though, the most significant revelation, I mean, as crazy as the rectal feeding thing was, the craziest thing that for me came out of that report is that the so-called enhanced interrogation techniques known to many people as torture were not very effective. That was the biggest. Yeah, whatever your reaction to rectal feeding is, fine. But the fact that these techniques weren't very effective at getting actionable and real intelligence for the United States and its allies, that should be the real big revelation on which we base future decisions on what techniques to use.
Yeah, and it's contrary to what Cheney had been saying and is still saying, that these methods were effective and that they prevented terror attacks, and there just really wasn't any evidence of that.
And as far as not hearing as much about torture now, I think part of it is people are very preoccupied with other news stories like ISIS and attacks and shootings just about every other week. We also know that when a population feels a more specific threat like ISIS, a population is typically more open to the use of techniques like the ones we learned about in the torture report. So I think there's a number of reasons why we're not hearing as much about torture right now. And part of it is when people know of a specific threat, they are more likely to say, yeah, even if I don't love the sound of that, we probably should be doing it to keep people safe, even though it doesn't.
Yeah, it's and you have to wonder what's happening now with torture. I mean, presumably these black sites are still operating. Now we're dealing with ISIS detainees and people related to that domestically. And I'm sure we're going to have a whole another slew of horror stories coming from detainees in the future.
I think we are going to learn, even though the topic has sort of gone off the radar, we are going to learn a significant amount and probably some very crazy stuff that has been and will be done over the last year, over the coming couple of years. When we will learn about it, I don't know. But if recent history is an indicator, we will hear something about it eventually. And it will probably be quite shocking and appalling to many people.